Hey everyone, Tactics here, and with Season 2 of The War Within now out for a little over a week, I've been hearing about some tough dungeon bosses that people have been really struggling with. So in this video, I'm going to be going over the 6 bosses that I've heard the most questions about, whether that be in my stream or over in my Discord channel. I'm going to walk you through here some kills of these bosses on Live Realms on a +10, so that both Fortified and Tyrannical are active, and I'll discuss kind of what we do here, what our strategy is, and just some tips to hopefully make them easier for you to handle. If I don't cover a boss that you're interested in, let me know down in the comments below, and if there's enough, we can make a part 2 to this video. But otherwise, let's get right into it with the boss that I definitely have had the most questions about here, and that is Baron Braunpyke, the second boss of Priory. Now, to start off here, you do want to be grouped as much as you can for the entire duration of the fight, because there's a lot of various ground effects from both the hammers as well as the castigator shield that just kind of clog up your room, and you want to kind of have them clustered in one area to give you more space. You see here, we start, pull the boss to the range, and then we just bounce to the other side of the room here, and we kind of just continue doing that for the various mechanics, whether it's shields or hammers. Either way, you want to be grouped, you want to cluster them, and then you want to move away from them. Also notice we did not use movement speeds really here. You want to try and save movement speeds for the castigator shield specifically, because the 3 players that get hit by that ability do also get a slow on them, so that's when you'll want to have movement speed available. Coming to the sacrificial pyres here, the first couple of these aren't too bad. They're triple soaks, the first 2 of them, and so basically what you want to do here is you always want your tank to go in, as well as just 2 other people, and you want to get this relatively quickly, and you want to make sure that the people going in that aren't the tank use a defensive, because depending on your spell cadence, which weirdly enough on this boss fight seems to vary from pull to pull. It was very, very weird. It wasn't consistent, at least in my experience on week 1. Maybe this gets fixed later on the patch, but for example, sometimes you get a castigator shield here after this first pyre, and sometimes we weren't getting that, so it was a little odd. But you want to be prepared with a defensive as the soaker, because if you do get that castigator shield, very, very dangerous. And on top of that, the dot itself is also just pretty dangerous here as well. So I, as the tank, I'm going to get in here and soak this, and then you're going to have 2 other players instantly go in there and soak it as well. I think the hunter and the monk did that. So if you have defenses available, that can be very, very useful for this. And then we have the shield coming out immediately after. So again, that's going to go out, and we're going to move. And if you were hit by this slow, you can use a speed if needed. Otherwise, you can just walk out if it's not near you, or even if you're just quick enough, you can just walk out as well. And we're just going to regroup over here and kind of repeat that for most of the fight. So that's movement. That's one issue. Now, where it gets very, very dangerous is the 3rd sacrificial pyre cast of the fight, because this will always be empowered by Vindictive Wrath, which means it has 5 soaks. That is a ton of group damage, not only from the AoE hits from soaking it, but also from the dots going out here. And so how you handle this is going to depend on your group composition. I think one big thing is that having any immunity in your group is very, very, very useful for this. Some don't really count, like Netherwalk, for example, is not really a true immunity. It won't prevent the application of this dot, which is what you're scared about. But things like AMS, as long as it holds, will count and will prevent the application of this dot. Things like Bubble, or spell warding from Paladin, so any Paladin with Bubble or Prot with spell warding can prevent the application of this dot. I'm not sure if Cloak works. I would assume it works if AMS and spell warding work, that Cloak would also work, but I haven't tested it myself. But any of these abilities can be used and then have 1 player soak all 5 stacks. So if you're going to use that, you want to use it on specifically the 3rd sacrificial pyre. So you're going to see here the next pyres in 25 seconds. We can fast forward. This is still going to be a triple pyre, so we're not really worried about this actually getting soaked. So we're just going to do the thing we just did, where I'm going to eat 1, and a couple other people are going to eat 1 as well. Hunter, and then looks like Turtle still gets the dot, by the way, so Turtle does not work, but Cloak may work. And then the next one coming up in 25 seconds, this is the one that is always empowered, at least in my experience. So he's got the Vindictive Wrath. There it goes. And I'm going to run over here, and I'm going to pop Spell Ward, and then really run in and out, in and out, in and out. And you want to be very careful here, because again, the biggest thing is the overlap of the soaks and any other ability. This one, we have the hammers and the interrupt going out, so that's not too big a deal. We could just move, but if it's ever the shield, everyone needs to be scared when you're doing a 5 soak here, because they get dipped pretty low by you soaking all 5 stacks relatively quickly. Healer just needs to be aware of that. Other thing with that interrupt, make sure everyone is looking and kicking it. It's totally fine if you commit like 3 kicks to it, as long as someone gets it, because it's basically a wipe if you don't get that kick. and otherwise it just keeps going from here. Now, if you don't have an immunity available to you, and like I said, AMS only works as long as it holds, so it'll work for like the first couple, maybe the first three, but the fourth and fifth it won't necessarily work for. So in that case, you may need to soak the fourth as the DK, and then have the fifth a second person soak the fifth stack. If you don't have any immunities available in your comp, you're going to probably want to stack 2 on your tank initially. Have someone take one, have someone take another, and then your tank can go and get the last one once their stacks have fallen, because you do have 30 seconds to actually detonate all those stacks. So you can, if you do the first series quickly, tank soaks 2, pops a defensive, you can move away, and then once the tank stacks have fallen off, they can move back and get that soak later on after you've moved from these hammers, for example. Because then it would still be up here with these hammers spinning, so the tank would just need to be careful. But that, in that sense, 3 stacks are getting eaten up by your tank, and then just 2 people again are soaking the other 2 remaining stacks. Very similar to every other set of this boss fight. So that's been Braunpyke. Hopefully that helps you get this boss out. It's definitely one of the tougher bosses this season. Moving on, we've got Mordretha, which is another very, very difficult fight. So first off, Reaping Scythe is maybe one of the scarier tank busters this season. So you really want to make sure that you have a good defensive rotation here on every single one. Spread them out so that you have something on every single one. You don't usually need to press defensive on anything else in this fight, so you can pretty much reserve them specifically for Reaping Scythe. This cone, Dark Devastation, it has the same bug as every single rotating frontal cone ability I've ever seen in WoW, where sometimes it'll show as it's not moving, but it is moving. So be careful, give it a lot of space, respect it, especially because it also knocks back, and you can get into this weird situation where you get bounced by the frontal into the wall, which then bounces you back into the frontal, and then bounce, it's bad. So make sure you give it some space. The main difficulty, I think, in a lot of this fight is this Grasping Rift here and the RNG involved with it, because they're not static spawns, right? This can spawn literally anywhere, like around the Pentagon-ish in the room. So, like, it could spawn directly on top of you. And obviously, that's really, really rough when it overlaps with this Manifest Death. So if that ever happens, that's kind of when you want to have CDs ready, like group defensives or whatever, to commit it if you have to move heavily during a rift because it spawned bad. Now, in general, the main damage of the fight does come from the spawning of the ads here, not the Grasping Rift, it's the Manifest Death that you're worried about. So that's when you want to have healing prepped for, is those casts. In terms of how we handle the ad spawns, we tend to want to interrupt, everyone interrupts their own ad, basically. You have Noxon as well if you're far out, and you don't want to commit a kick initially, that works fine. Bring a piece similar to a knock. So a kick or a knock to get your ad in, and then from here, we just have like AoE CCs available, Paladin, as single target stuns available. Just keep them all locked down under the boss, and they have low health, so you can kind of just cleave them down once they're all here and kind of in that meat grinder. Other than that, the 50% transition will always interrupt any cast going on here. So he's starting. We do barely not interrupt that rift, I believe. Yeah, so he starts his cast here at 50%. If you are struggling with this boss, you should be pooling damage as you get closer to 50%, and you should lust this. We lusted on pull here because we had all CDs. We're not really worried about this boss. We're in a coordinated group, right? So we're not something we're super worried about. But if you are struggling with this boss on whatever key level you're doing, save Bloodlust and start holding damage keys for when you hit 50% and Bloodlust this with all your damage, and just make this phase as short as possible, because this is where you can start to get the weird overlaps with like the rift and charge lines, or the rift and a bunch of circles going out. So the shorter this phase is, the better. Also, healers, constant ticking damage in this phase, so you're really scared of the Manifest Death cast, because you're taking that damage on top of already taking ticking damage at the same time, on top of whatever else is going on at the same time in this phase. So that's where you really want to make sure you have some defensive or some healing throughput available to players when that cast actually goes off. You can see it in a couple seconds here. I'll fast forward. Here's the Manifest Death. We have a rift going off. We have the pulsing damage. So this is super scary here. But we have maybe Mage Barrier went out there early. Monk has his throughput planned. We get the grouping here. Again, Nox, Divine Toll, Leg Sweep. And again, mostly just chilling around this is what I'm talking about. There's the bouncing. Almost died here. Popped Ardent. Did not die. Very powerful. But mostly just staying around the edge of the room here to avoid the charges and avoid these circles, just to make it a little bit easier, give you some more time to react to those things. And again, the shorter the phase is, sub 50%, the less awful it is. But whenever you have a rift spawn, you need to immediately be aware, where is that rift? We got lucky on the second phase rift spawns, because if you need a safe movement, if you ever get a rift that spawns directly on top of you, because that is the most scary thing that could possibly happen. Oh, that's the here we go. Swampface. Okay, heard a lot of stuff about Swampface. I talked about this a little bit in my recent Keystone Legend guide to Operation Floodgate, but this is basically one of those fights where it has a lot of constant damage going out. Razorchoke Find is going to bind the 4 non-tank players together. There's constant ticking damage, which is obviously going to ramp up with the key level. And then the big kind of damage instance comes from Awaken the Swamp, and that's kind of where you want to plan your defensive usages, plan your personals, plan your healing CDs, and you want to stagger them, not stack them, such that you have something covering every single one of the Awaken the Swamp casts. In terms of movement, because this is what's going to own a lot of pug groups, all you need is just some general rule. So for us, whenever the Mudslide Frontal goes out, our rule is always move left, always move left. Now, when it comes to the Awaken the Swamp cast here, you can't always necessarily follow the always left rule. Sometimes it's not great. Like in this situation, for example, it's kind of bad actually, because moving left here puts them in between 3 circles. So you can do it. You can still dodge because the circles designate one at a time, and that's up to you. And if you want to obey the always left rule in things like pugs, I think that's totally fine. It does make this a little bit spookier though. As you can see, they're gonna have to move 3 times here and look all ways and think, yeah, we do lose someone to it as well. It's totally survivable in that situation, but there's also plenty of situations where, you know, the circle will spawn immediately to your left, and then it doesn't make sense to move left all the way through that circle, right? So you need to use your head a little bit when it comes to the actual circle spawns, but I think having a rule to always move left on the frontal is totally fine, because you can be on the right side of the frontal and move all the way left across it with more than enough time before it goes off, and that's totally fine to do, and just obeying the same rule I think is a good idea for this boss. As a tank, just like last boss, good defensive rotation on Sludge Claws, another very scary tank buster. If you have a burst of self-healing, you can also save this for right after it goes off to clear that healing debuff off you. Can be really, really useful. And also be aware, if someone does die, I am now bound to someone until the next debuff goes off. So just keep that in mind. You can be picked, so you need to be with the group if someone dies. But otherwise, especially as a paladin, right, I kind of don't want to be constantly moving and replacing my consecrate all the time if I can help it. So I will try and not be with the group if I'm not bound to someone. But for a lot of tank specs, it's actually totally fine to keep moving with the group. So if that's not a problem, you can just move with your group as well. But otherwise, this fight is not really complicated. It's just very punishing in terms of, coordinating your positioning, and a decent amount of healing throughput required as well throughout the encounter. So that's kind of why I think it's been farming pugs. But I think once people start to get this fight, you know, they obey the always left rule or always right, whatever you want to do, just always going in the same direction as your partner, I think that's going to make this a lot easier. Moving on, Cujo, not a boss that's super complicated, but I did want to talk about it a bit because I've got a lot of questions about the box tech for this boss. So let's start out with that. So basically, whenever the box comes out and have the airdrop, what you want to do is you want to line up Cujo parallel to a side about halfway through it. So you're gonna see here, I'm gonna have him parallel to this side. He's kind of not even halfway through it, a little less than halfway, and this is kind of where you want to be, like somewhere where you have his hitbox between the quarter point and the halfway point is around where you're wanting to aim it. And you can see here, I'm going into the side of the box almost, and I'm still in melee range to hit the boss. You can see all the melee are kind of stacked up on me as well. Range have an easier time with this because it's much more forgiving, but basically what you're doing here is you want to make sure you have this little rogue stealth buff up here. That shows you're safe. Plater also says safe right here on my screen above the health bar. And so it's a little trick you can do to maintain melee uptime on this boss while still not getting absolutely owned by the venting flames. Basically, you just want to make the boss parallel and pull him, you know, between a quarter and halfway through the box, and that gets you a spot where you can safely use it. And I can fast forward to the next one too, show you what I do here. Again, pull him in parallel to the box. You can do it on either side, by the way. It does not need to be the long side. It can also work on the short side. Just same deal though, kind of a quarter to halfway through the box, and you're good. Now let's talk about the leaps here. I've heard a lot of conflicting reports. So previously in previous seasons, you were able to cancel these leaps with a combat drop like Meld or Vanish or Feign. I've heard that a lot of people are saying that you can no longer do that. This leap, if you like the first person targeted use one of those abilities, it would cancel the whole thing. Apparently it doesn't work anymore. I cannot 100% confirm that it does or does not work. Some people have said that only Hunter Feign works and all the other ones don't. I don't know, but the strategy was to have someone bait the leap out for this player. If they ran out really early, everyone else stacked in, it would target them first and they could use one of those things. That was the strategy. I don't know if it works or not anymore, so keep that in mind. Potentially works, potentially doesn't. But this is the kind of situation where, you know, the leap happens and then you see immediately Blazing Chomp happen. So this is where you would potentially want to press a defensive if you are one of the people targeted by that leap, because you're taking that leap damage and then you're also going to take Blazing Chomp damage very, very soon. So press personals if you're targeted by the leap. Healers try and top those players really quickly, and tanks watch this Blazing Chomp timer, pre-defensive it, because you see how fast it ticks you. It ticks pretty quick, and that was through you know, my full spell block and consecrate. So you need to be careful, especially if the healer doesn't get an instant dispel in a coordinated group. Obviously, you know that the spell is going to come really quickly. In a pug, you maybe don't know, so don't be afraid to commit pretty significant defensives to that to prevent it from absolutely owning you. Now, you can also do things to prevent it from applying. AMS does work. You can pre-AMS it, and the debuff doesn't go out on you. Pre-bubble, I assume pre-spell ward, but I actually haven't tested that myself. So things like that, again, immunities on the tank can be quite useful to kind of eliminate a chomp entirely, which is pretty nice. And again, you would always want to eliminate the one that happens after the leap, just to make that a little bit nicer. Then we get to a couple bosses from Dark Flame Clef. So first we got Blazikon. Boss, it's kind of a bit of a dance almost in terms of how you handle the boss. So to start, it's all about the candles, right? So Dousing Breath is the big hit of this fight. It happens about every like 55 seconds, I think. Yeah, according to the timers here, like 55 seconds. You want a button kind of for every single Dousing Breath. This first one is the least dangerous one because you have no damage going into the fight. Obviously, you should be full health, but every other one past this is a bit scarier, and we'll talk about that in a second. But this puts all the candles out and kind of resets the phase. So what's going to go on here? Immediately, Wick Lighter Barrage goes out. This will always prioritize ranged players. So if you're ranged, you can start out towards a candle and just kind of bait there. If your group doesn't have 3 ranged, then all the ranged will always get picked, and then whatever is left over of melee will get picked. Tanks will only get picked if people die again, so you don't necessarily really need to worry about that unless a lot of people are dead, but then you have other problems. So range can pre-bait out here, and that is going to make this running a lot easier because you want to hit as many candles as possible here. So you see we have range out here. One goes down, one goes to the side, and then we have another one running up the far side there. Just try and light as many candles as possible. This will then go out and shoot any candles you didn't light and give you a dot. So the more candles you light here, the less damage you take. It's now followed by Extinguishing Gust, and this is kind of the opposite. So you need to clear at least 1 candle here for safe room for the Incite Flames. However, you're going to get another one of the fire cones going out that we just saw, and that's going to give you a dot for the number of candles that you cleared. So you don't want to hit all 4 of these. And again, this always targets everyone who isn't the tank. You do not want to hit all 4 candles here. So you're going to see here, we're going to purposely miss 2 and purposely hit 2, and then just spread out and move away from the boss to make sure you don't get ticked, because these tornadoes tick very hard. So melee you saw there, I'll just rewind a second. You can see our monk basically jumps out back with it, avoids the cone, and then, you know, sidesteps. So that's what you want to do as melee. You do not want to get ticked by that cone. Tanks as well, step away from the cone, maybe back in the boss's hitbox a little bit just to make sure you avoid it. But again, we only hit 2 here, and you can hit 1 if you're really trying to min-max. It's kind of safe, especially in a pug group. Just assign 2 people to do it in case one of them misses. And then we just stack in one of the safe areas. And then this is going to now, again, light the remaining candles once more. And because we cleared 2, that's 2 candles that get lit here. So avoid these, and now this is going to get 2 stacks. So again, if you cleared 4 here, you get 4 stacks. That's very dangerous because this goes immediately into the Dousing Breath. And this is, again, why you want defensive coverage. This is the most valued defensive here. Just defensive the stacks of these dots, assuming your defensive will last long enough for the Dousing Breath here. But I think most defensives will last that entire duration, because you can see there, it lasts past the actual Dousing Breath hit. So that is where you want a defensive those dots. Healers be ready to keep players up through that ticking damage, and then again, have that defensive. If you planted it for the dot, it should also last through that big hit. And then from here, it just repeats. So it's all about dancing. So again, range, at this point, you need to get out, spread out for the candles. You're going to get targeted by the Wick Lighter Barrage. Melee, if you're going to be picked because you don't have enough range, be ready to move out as well. And it just repeats, repeats, repeats. So again, you want to hit as many candles with the barrage as possible. You only want to hit 1 or 2 candles with the Extinguishing Gust, and you just kind of repeat that, repeat that. So that's Blazikon. Let's now move on to the final boss, the Darkness. And this is kind of all about, you know, candle management, your heat management of the candle. So a few things to start. One, you're going to have one player who's kind of designated to mostly filling in the wax, and one, you're going to have one player who's designated to mostly move the candle around. I found that to be the most consistent. So if you have a very mobile range DPS like a BM Hunter, they're a great choice to deal with the wax. Your healer is also a pretty decent choice to deal with the wax, so that comes with some stipulations we'll talk about in a second. In terms of the candle movement, melee DPS or your tank, I'm going to be the one doing it in this just because, you know, they're always kind of in range. And so generally, the person who's assigned to the candle, they're always going to move it for the Umbral Slash. The person who's assigned to dealing with wax, they're going to be, you know, making sure they get wax for the candle here. The other thing, people who get targeted by Shadow Blast, it's very, very good to just run out to a wax candle. When you get Shadow Blast, grab it and bring it back. You're going to have to be away from the group anyways. If your candle is kind of totally fine and you have someone else already out there doing that, you can instead, like if you're a melee DPS, kind of milk on the boss and then move out at the last second. Just make sure you don't cleave your candle. Otherwise, you're right, we're moving with the beam. Again, similar rule here as Swamp Man. You always want to try and be consistent with your movement, move in the same direction. So we always kind of move clockwise. The other thing is it is better to kind of position yourself, especially after the first frontal here, towards the middle of the room a bit more as opposed to on the edge, because all 4 of the potential wax spawns are kind of more centralized in the room here. So moving this direction makes it a little bit less movement for whoever is assigned to get those waxes back to your candle. So that's useful. Call Darkspawn, just kick that ASAP. If you let it channel, it's going to spawn more of these guys. These guys have very, very little health. They're not really too much of a problem, so just make sure they don't cast. And then we have the Eternal Darkness cast. So this is kind of the situation where you potentially don't want your healer to be the one with the wax, especially if they have to plant to heal your group during this and they can't deposit the wax, because basically you want to deposit a wax halfway through this cast because it drains so much of your candle's energy. And so on this first one, for example, we do have our healer doing it because he's going to commit his Spirit Link down for this, and then he's going to fill it partway through. But later on, for example, we don't have the healer doing it. He's going to plant and heal, and you can have either, again, a ranged DPS or any mobile DPS literally just jump out, grab a wax, and jump back in to fill the candle up during the cast, or a ranged can just get it, hold it for, you know, 5 or 6 seconds before this Eternal Darkness cast, and then deposit it halfway through. Either works, as long as you have someone depositing partway through the Eternal Darkness that ideally, again, isn't your healer so they can heal. That is going to make it perfectly safe. And then the healer, because there's no damage basically happening outside of Eternal Darkness, they can just refill the candle between casts of this ability. Spirit Link goes out, he heals it, like I said, and then from here on, someone else is going to be doing it. In terms of Shadow Blast as well, by the way, you should probably be pressing a defensive on this. Again, there's not a ton of damage going out. It happens once every 30 seconds, and it picks a random player, so should have more than enough defensives for pressing on this ability, and it does deal quite a bit of damage here. That's probably diffuse or something crazy like that, but, you know, there's some later in the fight which nearly one-shot people, so just keep that in mind. Again, rotating around here every time. One thing about tanks getting the orb mid Eternal Darkness, beware the boss seems to be moving now during this channel, so you can't necessarily do it. I think I do it in this next one. Fast forward a little bit here. Yeah, here's the Eternal Darkness cast. Like I said, the healer is planting. He does actually have a light, so he pops healing tide to them there, actually, so he's fine. But you can see the boss did start moving slightly when I leaped out and charged back in. So just be aware, if you don't have the kind of mobility as like a warrior or a demon hunter or maybe a brewmaster monk with transcend, it can be tricky for the tank to do this. So it's better to just have a mobile DPS do it, or if your healer has mobility during their healing, they can do it. Resto Shaman is obviously very good at that, but something like a Disc Priest would be worse at it. So it's kind of dependent on what your healer actually is. Resto, another one, would be very good at doing the wax even during the damage, right? Because they can pre-ramp for it, all their hots are out, and then they can go drop the wax off. So comp dependent there, but basically have someone assigned to be doing the bulk of the wax and have someone assigned to be moving the candle. Stay central, and that is mostly fine for this boss. But there we have it, guys. Hopefully this helps you and your group on some of these harder Mythic Plus bosses this season. And if it did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like it, including Keystone Legend Route Walkthroughs, which are going to be releasing over the next couple weeks, as well as Mythic Raid boss guides as well. So got a ton of content. Make sure you're subscribed. Of course, none of this would be possible if it wasn't for my amazing supporters over on Patreon. So thanks so much for supporting me, and thank you everyone here for watching. I'll see you all in the next video.